Welcome, dreamers, to Whispers of the Night. Tonight, we will journey together into a world of wonder where soft lights, gentle winds, and magical places await you. Before we begin, make yourself comfortable. Lie down, adjust your pillow, wrap yourself in a blanket, and let your body sink into the support beneath you. If you enjoy these journeys, don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of the Night so you can follow along every night, drifting into calm and serenity together. Tonight, we'll explore the Quilt of Thousand Journeys, story woven with quiet magic, soft light, and the gentle rhythm of dreams. Close your eyes if you wish, or keep them softly open as you listen. Let the warmth of the evening wrap around you. Each breath brings you closer to peace, each heartbeat slower, softer, carrying you toward the story that awaits. Feel the calm settle in. Feel the quiet space around you. Tonight, we travel gently, softly, letting the world of the Quilt of Thousand Journeys unfold in your mind. Breathe deeply, let go, and allow yourself to be carried into the story. This is your time. This is your place of rest. Before we begin our journey tonight, let's take a few moments to let go. Close your eyes, if you wish, and notice the rhythm of your breathing, slow, steady, natural. With each breath in, feel the coolness of the night air. With each breath out, feel the warmth of your body, releasing any weight, any tension. Your shoulders soften. Your jaw loosens. Your hands rest gently where they are. Even the smallest muscles around your eyes grow calm, as though they too are ready to drift. Now, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a quiet forest, just as twilight deepens into night. The air is cool but comforting, filled with the scent of pine, moss, and earth after rain. A faint mist curls across the ground, carrying the hush of the evening. You take a step forward and feel the soft ground beneath your feet, steady and welcoming. Fireflies flicker in the distance, like scattered stars brought down to the forest floor. A stream flows nearby, its voice gentle and unhurried. With every ripple, with every glimmer of reflected starlight, you feel yourself sinking deeper into stillness. Let your breath move in time with the flow of the stream. In with its rise, out with its fall. Each moment grows quieter, softer, easier. Your body feels light, almost as if it could dissolve into the mist. Carried by the night itself, the forest, the stars, the stream, the hush of your own heartbeat, they all belong to this peaceful silence, and so do you. Allow yourself to rest here, surrounded by gentle night, until the story unfolds and guides you further into your dreams. The Quilt of Thousand Journeys. The quilt in the attic The attic had always been a place of shadows and dust, a world of forgotten trunks and boxes that breathed out faint scents of cedar and time. Eira had climbed its narrow staircase countless times before, each creak of the wooden steps familiar beneath her feet, yet that evening felt different. A hush lingered in the air, softer than silence itself, as if the house were holding its breath in anticipation. She carried a candle in one hand, the flame bending gently as she moved, and the glow illuminated motes of dust that swirled like tiny golden stars in the dimness. Her grandmother's attic stretched wider than she remembered. Rows of old chests lined the sloping walls, their surfaces etched with scratches, initials, and faint patterns of use. Cobwebs clung to corners, and faded curtains hung over a narrow round window that let in a stream of silvery moonlight. Eira's eyes were drawn to that moonlight, how it fell like a path across the cluttered floor, leading her gaze toward a chest she hadn't noticed before. It was small compared to the rest, set slightly apart as if it had been waiting all along. The chest was made of dark wood, polished in some forgotten age, and its brass hinges glimmered faintly under the moon's silver touch. A quilt rested inside, folded neatly, waiting like a secret. Eira felt her breath catch as she knelt before it. Her fingers traced the carvings on the lid spirals and arcs that looked almost like rivers meeting at the sea end. She thought she heard, faintly, the echo of a lullaby her grandmother used to hum. Her grandmother's voice floated up from behind her, soft but steady, as if she had been standing there all along. That quilt is older than you can imagine, my child. Each patch carries a journey, a memory stitched by hands that traveled farther than our eyes can see. Eira turned to her, startled, but the old woman's gaze was not on her. It lingered, instead, on the chest, her wrinkled hands folded together in quiet reverence. There was a weight in her voice, not sadness, but something deeper, like the ache of remembering too much. Eira looked back at the quilt. She had never seen fabric like it before. Each square was a different shade, a different story. Some patches shimmered faintly under the moonlight, their colors shifting as though they had been woven from threads of dawn, sunset, and starlight itself. Others carried textures that were not of any cloth she had touched, smooth as water, rough as stone, soft as feathers. The closer she looked, the more she thought she saw movement in the threads, as if tiny landscapes lived within them, a river flowing endlessly, clouds drifting over mountains, a lantern glowing against a night sky. Her grandmother touched her shoulder lightly, guiding her closer. This quilt carries 1,000 journeys, Eira. The women of our family have kept it for generations. It has been mended when torn, patched when worn, and always, always kept close to the light of the moon, because under moonlight it remembers. The girl swallowed, her heart thudding with curiosity and something close to wonder. Remembers what? She whispered. Her grandmother smiled, the kind of smile that held mysteries instead of answers. Where it has been, and where it will take you should you choose to sleep beneath it that night. After the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, the distant ticking of the clock, the sigh of wind brushing against shutters, Eira carried the quilt into her room. She unfolded it carefully, each square spilling stories in color and light. Draping it across her small bed, she felt its unexpected warmth. It was heavier than it looked, as though the weight of all those journeys had been stitched into its threads. She lay down and pulled it over herself. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender and old cedarwood, with a sweetness like rain on dry earth. Its weight pressed gently against her chest, comforting, grounding. Yet beneath it, she felt something more, a faint hum, not of sound, but of life, vibrating quietly through the fabric. The moonlight reached across her bed, brushing against the quilt. The shimmer that had seemed faint in the attic now deepened, glowing softly, as though the patches themselves had awoken. One square glowed with the color of the sea, shifting blues that rippled like waves. Another brightened into a field of gold, stalks of wheat swaying in an invisible breeze. Eira's eyes grew heavy, her breaths slowing, but her mind swam in that glow. She thought she heard voices, soft, distant, carried like echoes. The sound of a market square, bustling with life, laughter of children splashing in a river, a song carried on desert winds. She wanted to ask what it all meant, but her tongue felt heavy, her body sinking deeper into the quilt's embrace. Sleep took her like a tide, pulling her gently, not into darkness, but into light. When she opened her eyes again, the room was gone. She stood on a shoreline beneath a vast sky, the horizon painted with colors she could not name. The sand beneath her bare feet shimmered as though it had been woven of silver threads, and the sea stretched endlessly, its waves whispering secrets each time they broke. She turned, expecting her grandmother's house, but there was only a path of glowing stones leading away into a forest of tall, luminescent trees. The quilt still wrapped around her shoulders, its edges trailing like a cloak. She clutched it close, and it seemed to hum louder, as though recognizing where they had arrived. A breeze carried the scent of cinnamon and pine, and with it came faint sounds, the rhythm of hooves, the rustle of sails, the low hum of voices carried by the wind. Eira realized with a start she was inside the quilt. Each patch was a doorway, and she had stepped through the first of them. She pressed her hand against the glowing blue square near her shoulder. The world around her shifted like rippling water. Suddenly, she was standing on a ship, its sails full, the air thick with salt and spray. Sailors moved around her, laughing, shouting, tying ropes with practiced ease. No one seemed to notice her, yet she felt their journeys as if they passed through her, the ache of leaving home, the thrill of discovering new lands, the fear of storms rising out of nowhere. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, her heart racing with awe. When she opened them again, the sea blurred into golden fields. She found herself standing among tall wheat, sunlight warm on her skin, cicadas buzzing lazily. A woman with dark hair bent low to gather sheaves, her hands strong and sure, and Eira thought she saw her glance up, her eyes full of a knowledge that reached across centuries. Each patch was alive, each square a story, and the quilt carried them all. Eira walked through landscapes that shifted like turning pages, a desert where wind sang through endless dunes, a mountain village where bells chimed in thin, sharp air, a lantern-lit street where rain slicked the stones, and voices called out in languages she didn't know but somehow understood. Every place left an imprint on her, weaving itself into her thoughts like another stitch in the quilt. Time didn't feel real there. She wandered until her eyelids grew heavy, her body aching with a strange, sweet tiredness. She curled again beneath the quilt, even there within its dream, and as her eyes closed, she thought she heard her grandmother's voice, softer now, like an echo from far away. Every journey begins with a single patch, my child, and you have just begun yours. When she woke, dawn's light spilled across her bedroom floor. The quilt lay heavy and still across her, its patches ordinary once more, only fabric and thread. But Eira knew what she had seen. She touched one square gently, her fingers lingering on the weave, and though it looked plain in the morning sun, she felt a faint hum beneath her touch, as if it remembered her, and she understood. With a thrill that made her heart beat fast, the journeys were not only of the past, they were waiting, endless and alive, stitched into every corner of the quilt. And she had been chosen to walk among them. That morning, the world felt wider than it ever had. The desert of painted sands. The moment Eira's eyelids fluttered closed, she felt the quilt stir again, its weight pressed gently, like a hand on her shoulder, steadying her as the world folded inward and then opened wide. Colors bled into one another, rippling like water through her dreams. And when she opened her eyes, the air itself shimmered with heat and light. She stood in a desert, vast and unbroken, a sea of sand that stretched to the horizon in every direction. But this was no ordinary desert teach. Dune was alive with color. The sands shifted with the sun's rays, rippling in bands of ruby, gold, and sapphire, as though 1,000 jewels had been ground fine and scattered across the earth. As the wind swept over the dunes, the colors changed again, painting the desert anew every few breaths. Eira gasped, her sandals sinking into warm grains that glittered like embers under her feet. The sky above was endless and cloudless, a dome of deep blue. Yet, even here, in a place that seemed so harsh, the quilt clung to her shoulders like a second skin, its patches glowing faintly in sympathy with the desert's colors. She began to walk, her shadow stretching long beside her. The sand whispered with every step, a dry song that seemed to echo endlessly, as if the desert itself were alive. For a while, she thought she was alone, but then she saw a figure in the distance, a dark silhouette outlined by the blazing light. As she drew closer, the shape resolved into a man seated on a low rise of sand. He wore long robes of faded indigo, their edges frayed but dignified, and a turban that shielded his face from the sun. In his hand he carried a staff polished smooth with age, and beside him rested a leather satchel that looked as though it had been carried across many lands. He was humming softly to himself, a tune that wove through the dry wind like a thread of water in the desert. The man looked up as Eira approached, his eyes crinkling with a kind of timeless patience. His voice was deep and warm, carrying the weight of countless stories. "So," he said, with the hint of a smile, "the quilt has brought another dreamer to my sands." Eira stopped, clutching the quilt tighter. You know about it?" she asked. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting to the cloth wrapped around her. "Of course, I have seen it before. Long ago, another traveler rested beneath its patches and woke here as you did. Each square holds the memory of such journeys, little one. Each stitch is the breath of a dreamer, woven into cloth so that none may be forgotten." Eira's heart quickened. "Then this dessert, it's someone's memory." The man tilted his head, considering her. "Memory, dream, story, they are not so different, are they? What you see around you is not only the echo of one traveler, but of many. Each color of sand carries a tale. The rubies are the journeys of those who loved fiercely. The gold belongs to those who sought wisdom. The sapphire sands are the paths of wanderers who carried music in their hearts." Eira looked out across the glowing dunes. Now that she listened more closely, she thought she could hear faint voices rising from them, snatches of laughter, fragments of songs, a cry of longing, a whispered prayer. The desert was alive with 1,000 lives, flowing and shifting like the sands themselves. The man reached into his satchel and drew out a small wooden box. Its lid was carved with symbols Eira didn't recognize, spirals, lines, and circles that seemed to shift in the light. He opened it to reveal tiny scraps of fabric, worn thin but carefully folded. Each one was a fragment of color: scarlet, amber, midnight blue. "These are my keepsakes," he explained, offering the box for her to see. "Pieces of stories I have gathered from those who wandered into this place. When the quilt brings someone here, I listen. I write their journeys in sand and sky, and when they leave, I keep a token, so the desert will not forget." Eira touched one of the scraps lightly. The fabric was warm, humming faintly, the smell of dates and spice at a desert market, the sound of drums echoing against stone cliffs. She pulled her hand back, her heart racing. The man chuckled softly. "The quilt has opened your sight quickly. You are meant to walk far, I think." Eira looked down at the quilt wrapped around her shoulders. The patches shimmered faintly, colors shifting as if in response. She realized then that the quilt was not just carrying hurt, was teaching her, filling her with the weight of countless stories. And in return, she would become a part of it too. She sat with the man for a long while, listening as he told tales carried in the desert winds. He spoke of a boy who followed the sapphire sands to find a lost melody that could calm storms, of a woman who planted a single date seed in golden dunes, believing it would grow into an orchard for her children's children. Of a caravan that disappeared into ruby sands, remembered only by the crimson glow that sometimes flared at dusk. The desert shimmered around his words, reshaping itself with each story. When he spoke of orchards, she saw groves of palms rising for a heartbeat before melting back into sand. When he spoke of lost caravans, shadows of camels and riders appeared on the horizon, then dissolved into heat. Every tale was alive, painted into the desert itself, waiting for listeners like brushstrokes, waiting for eyes. Eira found herself whispering questions she didn't know she had. Do the stories ever end? Or do they live here forever? The man looked out across the sands, his expression unreadable. Stories end, little one, but they do not die. They leave echoes. The desert remembers, the quilt remembers, and now you do too. His words sank into her like water into thirsty ground. She thought of her grandmother's attic, the chest, the way the quilt had glowed in moonlight. How many travelers had it carried? How many deserts, forests, seas, and skies lived stitched in its fabric? She was not the first, nor would she be the last. Yet here she was, chosen to walk inside its woven world. The man rose slowly, his staff pressing into the sand. He gestured toward the horizon, where the dunes shifted in a slow, rolling wave of color. Go on, Eira, walk the sands. The quilt will show you more than I can. My task is only to remind dreamers where they are. Eira stood, brushing the glittering grains from her hands. She bowed slightly, unsure why, but feeling it was right. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled, his face softening like dawn over the dunes. Remember this, you do not walk through stories. You become part of them. One day, a child may sleep beneath the quilt and find themselves standing on a dune of sapphire, hearing your footsteps in the sand. The thought filled her with wonder and a strange, quiet joy. She clutched the quilt tighter and turned toward the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, yet she no longer felt small within it. With each step, the sands shifted beneath her feet, glowing in deeper colors, carrying her farther into a living story. The wind picked up, swirling around her like a song, and as she walked, she felt the quilt hum against her skin, stitching her journey into its fabric. When the world finally began to blur again, when the sands dissolved into shimmering threads of light, she closed her eyes with a smile, because now she knew she wasn't just traveling, she was becoming part of the 1,000 journeys. The city of floating lanterns. The world around Eira shifted once again, the desert winds dissolving into threads of light that curled like smoke and folded into silence. She felt the quilt draw tighter about her shoulders, cocooning her in warmth, as if it were carrying her carefully from one dream to the next. The faint hum of its stitches pulsed in her ears like the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Then, slowly, sound returned, the gentle murmur of water, the distant laughter of voices, and the hush of 1,000 paper wings brushing against the night. When her eyes opened, she stood at the edge of a river. It flowed wide and calm beneath a sky deep with twilight. Along its banks, a city rose in tiers of wooden houses. Bridges arched like ribbons over the water, and temples stood crowned with curved roofs that caught the glow of lantern light. Everywhere she looked, lanterns floated upward, glowing orbs of soft gold, crimson, and jade, rising into the night like stars set free from the earth. Eira gasped softly. The air shimmered with the glow of countless lanterns. Their reflections mirrored on the river below, so that sky and water seemed to hold to heavens at once. People thronged the riverbanks, their laughter and chatter ringing like bells. Children clutched lanterns shaped like fish or birds. Elders lifted simpler globes, whispering something into the flame before releasing them. The whole city seemed alive with hope, each lantern carrying a story skyward. She stepped carefully onto the worn stones of the riverside path, her quilt trailing behind like a cloak. The scents of jasmine, river reeds, and sweet dumplings mingled in the air, making her stomach twist with sudden hunger and delight. Musicians played flutes and strings that wove through the night like threads of silk. Every sense felt sharpened here, as if the city itself were part of the quilt's magic. "Are you lost to?" a voice asked beside her. Eira turned to see a boy about her age, his black hair falling into his eyes, a lantern cradled in his hands. It was shaped like a small house, its walls painted with careful strokes, though the paint was chipped and fading. He looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and relief, as if hoping she might understand something he could not. "Lost," she repeated, unsure. He nodded toward the sky. "I let go of my family's lantern. It should be easy to spot. It has a red roof and golden windows, but there are too many now." He gestured upward. The sky above was crowded with lights, each lantern drifting higher, flickering like fireflies in a gentle swarm. "I've been searching all night, trying to follow it, but they all look the same from a distance." Eira tilted her head, gazing at the endless lanterns. "Why is it so important?" she asked softly. The boy held the lantern tighter, his eyes shining in the glow. "Because every lantern carries a wish. My family's wish is in the one I lost. My grandmother whispered it before we released it together. If I can't find it," his voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken worry. Eira felt the quilt shift faintly against her, as if reminding her that this was no ordinary city. She looked at the boy with sudden certainty. "Then we'll find it," she said. His eyes widened. "You'll help me," she smiled. "Of course. No wish should be lost among the stars." Together, they began to weave through the crowd. Eira watched as families clustered along the riverbank, lighting candles and placing them inside fragile frames of paper and wood. Some lanterns were painted with dragons and phoenixes. Others bore flowers, mountains, or poems brushed in black ink. Each was lifted carefully, reverently, and released to join the others. The night sky pulsed brighter with every lantern that rose. They crossed a narrow bridge, leaning over the railing to peer upward. Lanterns drifted like a slow tide of light, some bobbing lower, as if reluctant to leave, others soaring high with steady flame. The boy pointed suddenly. "That one do, you see the red roof?" Eira squinted, following his finger. A lantern higher than most glowed faintly with a hint of crimson. But as soon as she thought she recognized it, the lantern veered, merging with dozens of others that burned the same color. Her shoulders sank. "How will we ever know which one is yours?" The boy's face fell too, but then he whispered, almost to himself, "Grandmother said, wishes are stubborn things. They find their way, even when we can't see them." They wandered deeper into the city, the quilt brushing softly against Eira's ankles. She began to notice something strange. While to the boy, the lanterns looked the same. To her eyes, a few shimmered differently, threads of light stretching faintly from them, tugging like invisible strings. She realized with a start that these threads connected to people. A mother's hand clutched tight to her child as their lantern glowed brighter. A couple holding hands as their lantern shimmered with twin sparks. An old man's lantern flickering softly as he bowed his head. Every lantern carried a wish, and every wish carried a thread. Eira closed her eyes and focused. The quilt hummed against her shoulders, and suddenly she saw one thread standing apart, glowing faintly gold. It stretched away from the boy's lantern house, drifting higher but still tethered. She reached out, pointing quickly. "There, that one, it's yours." The boy followed her gaze, eyes widening. "How did you?" He didn't finish, but hope bloomed across his face like dawn breaking. Together they ran through the crowd, chasing the lantern as it floated higher. They crossed another bridge, breathless, eyes locked on the glowing house among the stars. It seemed to hesitate, hovering as though waiting for them. When they reached the river's edge again, the boy clasped his hands together and whispered into the air. "Please, carry our wish," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Carry it farther than the wind, farther than the stars." The lantern flickered, glowing brighter. Eira thought she heard something like the faint echo of his grandmother's voice, warm and steady, blessing the night. Then the lantern rose swiftly, darting upward as though eager to join the farthest stars. The boy's eyes shone with tears, but he was smiling. "It heard me," he said, voice breaking with relief. "It really heard." Eira's heart swelled. She looked at the lanterns filling the sky, realizing now that they were more than lights. They were wishes carried on flame and air, each one a promise, rising toward the infinite. Some would fade quickly, their flames small and fragile, but others, like the boy's, would burn brighter, stronger, and travel farther than anyone could imagine. They sat together on the riverbank, watching the sky until it seemed to overflow with light. Lanterns floated endlessly upward, scattering like seeds of hope into the heavens. Music drifted on the breeze, mingling with laughter and prayers. For a moment, Eira felt herself lifted too, as though she were part of that great rising, her own heart stitched into the night. The boy turned to her, his face glowing in lantern light. "Thank you," he whispered. "Without you, I would have lost it." Eira shook her head. "It was never lost. It was only waiting for you to see it again." The boy laughed softly, relief warming his voice. "Maybe so. Still, I won't forget you." He hesitated, then added shyly, "When you see lanterns again, Maybe one of them will carry my wish. If it reaches you, you'll know." Eira smiled, her chest tightening with something like joy and sorrow woven together. "I'll look for it," she promised. The quilt stirred, wrapping tighter around her shoulders. Its hum deepened, tugging her gently, as if reminding her that her path lay onward. She glanced once more at the boy, at the city alive with lanterns, at the sky thick with glowing wishes. Then the world began to blur, the lights folding into threads of gold that melted into the quilt's fabric as she sank into that shifting glow. She whispered one last thought into the air. Some wishes travel farther than others, and some find their way back. And then the river, the lanterns, the city, and the boy dissolved into dream, leaving only the warmth of the quilt and the promise of the next journey. The forest of whispering leaves. The quilt stirred again, as though restless with secrets it had yet to share. Eira felt the familiar warmth press against her shoulders, a cocoon of fabric and dream. Her eyelids fell shut like petals closing to night, and when she opened them again, the air was cool and rich with the fragrance of moss and rain. She was standing beneath a canopy so vast and green it seemed to hold the sky itself. The forest stretched endlessly around her, trees rising tall and ancient, their trunks furrowed with time, their branches interlaced like hands clasped in an eternal prayer. Shafts of silvery light filtered through the leaves, turning the ground into a shifting mosaic of green and gold. Yet it was not the beauty of the forest alone that made her breath catch. It was the sound the leaves whispered, not with the ordinary rustle of wind, but with voices soft, layered, endless. They murmured in countless tongues, like an orchestra of memory playing all at once. Some whispers were faint, fragile as sighs. Others were strong and clear, carrying laughter, words of love, or cries of longing. The air trembled with them, and Eira stood still, listening, as though the forest itself were a book, and she had just turned its first page. A shiver traced her spine. The whispers seemed to know her, to call her name, though no one stood nearby. She pressed the quilt tighter to her shoulders and took a step forward. At once, the sound grew louder, as if the forest welcomed her deeper into its embrace. She walked slowly, careful not to disturb the soft carpet of moss underfoot. Every tree she passed seemed alive with secrets. Some bore carvings in their bark symbols, initials, spirals that glowed faintly when her hand brushed near. Others leaned together as though sharing confidences too sacred to be overheard. She tilted her head, straining to catch fragments. I was here, I dreamed of her face. The river carried me farther than I knew. These were not just voices. They were echoes of journeys left behind like footprints in the air. As she wandered, a flash of movement caught her eye. A silver fox stood ahead, its fur gleaming as though woven of moonlight. Its eyes glowed amber, steady and unafraid. For a long moment, it regarded her, tail curling around its paws, before it turned and padded silently along a narrow path. It paused once to glance back at her, ears pricked, as if to say, "Follow." Eira hesitated only a moment before stepping after it. The quilt hummed in approval, its fabric brushing lightly against her skin. The fox moved like a ripple through water, its paws making no sound on the moss. Eira followed closely, winding deeper into the forest. The further they went, the louder the whispers grew, until the air itself seemed heavy with them. She caught pieces of stories, a woman's voice speaking of mountains that touched the stars, a boy's laughter echoing through fields of wheat, the weary sigh of a traveler who had walked until his feet bled. Each voice came and went, leaving her both awed and unsettled. "Why do they whisper?" she asked aloud, though the fox gave no reply. Still, she sensed an answer in the forest itself. Every journey leaves something behind, not just steps in soil, but echoes in time. These trees had gathered them all, holding them in their leaves like guardians of memory. The path narrowed until the trees closed in, their trunks so wide that she could not see around them. The fox slipped between them easily, and Eira followed, heart pounding. Then the forest opened suddenly into a clearing, bathed in silver light. At its center stood a tree unlike the rest. It was vast, older than anything she had ever seen, its trunk as broad as a house, its bark shimmering faintly as though infused with starlight. Its branches spread wide, draped with countless leaves that glowed softly in hues of silver and green, and each leaf whispered, not with one voice, but with many, as though entire lives had been etched into its veins. The fox sat at the base of the tree, gazing up at it. Eira approached slowly, awe filling her chest until she could hardly breathe. She reached out a trembling hand to touch one glowing leaf. At her fingertips, warmth blossomed, the whispers swelled, and suddenly she was elsewhere. She saw a woman kneeling beside a river, tears streaming down her face as she released a boat carved of wood, carrying the ashes of someone she loved. She felt the grief as though it were her own, raw and tender, but also the quiet strength that followed. The vision faded, and Eira gasped, pulling her hand back. Her heart ached, but she could not resist. She touched another leaf. This time, she was running across a hilltop, wind in her hair, a friend's laughter chasing her heels. Joy surged through her, pure and untamed, and for a moment she felt weightless. She understood then, each leaf carried the echo of a traveler who had once passed through. Their joy, their sorrow, their longing woven into the forest itself. No journey vanished completely. It remained, whispering forever in the leaves. The fox rose and patted closer, its amber eyes meeting hers. In that gaze, she felt another message, wordless yet clear. You too will leave echoes. Eira sank to her knees, pressing her hands to the moss. She thought of the desert sands that glowed with stories, the lanterns rising with wishes, and now this forest alive with whispers of memory. Each place had taught her something, a truth larger than herself. Her chest swelled with the weight of it, and yet it felt like a gift. She closed her eyes, listening deeply. She thought of her grandmother's voice, soft and steady in the attic. She thought of her own wish, unspoken, that she might never forget these journeys. And as she breathed, she felt the forest shift. The whispers grew softer, not gone, but settling, like 1,000 voices exhaling in peace. When she opened her eyes, the fox was gone. Only the great silver tree remained, glowing faintly in the hush. She touched the quilt at her shoulders, its patches shimmering gently, and knew that her echo had already been left behind. The trees would remember her too, just as they remembered all who had come before. Slowly, the clearing dissolved, leaves scattering like falling stars. The whispers grew distant, melting into silence as the quilt drew her away. Eira held one last breath of the forest in her lungs, carried onward by the hum of the quilt to whatever journey awaited next. The Mountain of Forgotten Songs. The quilt stirred again that night, tugging at Eira's dreams like a gentle hand leading her upward. She had learned not to resist the pull, for every time she closed her eyes beneath its patchwork, she was carried into a world that shimmered between memory and magic. This time, when her eyes opened, she found herself standing at the base of a mountain that seemed to touch the edge of the stars. Its slopes were not barren or jagged, as mountains often were, but softened by the glow of something unseen, threads of light that wove themselves into the air, flickering faintly like candle flames caught in the wind. The night sky above was clear, studded with more stars than Eira had ever counted, and the mountain itself hummed as though it remembered a song too great to keep silent. Eira took her first step, the ground crunching beneath her feet, and realized that the mountain was not stone alone. Scattered across its winding paths were shards of instruments, long-forgotten broken flutes carved from bone, cracked drums, strings snapped from lyres that no longer held their shape. Each fragment pulsed faintly with light, as though even in their silence they carried the memory of sound. When the wind rose, the fragments stirred, and the whole mountain exhaled a low and haunting note. Eira shivered, not from cold, but from the feeling that the place itself was alive, waiting for her to listen. As she climbed, the air grew heavier with music, though no one played. The wind caught in the hollows of stone and bone, spinning a melody that carried half-remembered lullabies, half-forgotten prayers. Some notes reminded her of her grandmother humming as she sewed, soft and steady. Others reminded her of the marketplace bells from her own village, cheerful yet distant. The mountain gathered all these half-songs and turned them into something larger. A choir woven out of memory. Halfway up, Eira found herself standing before a cavern carved into the mountain's side. At its entrance sat a woman cloaked in fabric that shimmered like woven moonlight. She did not move at first, and Eira wondered if she were another memory left behind. But then the woman raised her head, and her eyes, dark and endless, fixed on Eira with quiet recognition. Without speaking, the woman lifted a spindle of silver wood and in her hands the threads of light that drifted through the air began to gather. She spun them delicately, each thread humming as though it carried the echo of a song. When she finally spoke, her voice was like a sigh carried over the ridges. "These are the songs people forget," she said. "The ones whispered to infants who grew and forgot the arms that held them. The ones sung to lovers who parted at dawn and never returned. The ones shared by workers as they sowed fields or rowed boats, swallowed by the years. They do not die, child, they wait. And here I weave them into threads so that they may live again." Eira stepped closer, mesmerized. The glowing threads pulsed softly in the woman's hands, weaving themselves into shapes that reminded Eira of constellations. She could almost hear the words that belonged to them, but they slipped away like water through her fingers. "Why are they here, on this mountain?" Eira asked softly. "Because mountains, remember," the woman replied, still spinning. "They are the bones of the earth, and bones carry echoes. Every laugh, every cry, every tune hummed without thinking, it leaves an imprint. When the world forgets, the mountain does not. It gathers what is left behind." The thought filled Eira with both awe and sorrow. She thought of her grandmother's voice, frail yet steady, telling her stories at night. What would happen when her grandmother's voice was no more? Would this mountain gather her lullabies too, and spin them into threads of light so they could never truly vanish? The idea comforted her, even as it made her chest ache. The cloaked woman gestured for Eira to follow, and together they entered the cavern. Inside, the walls were covered with woven tapestries, each thread glowing faintly in the dark. When Eira looked closer, she saw that each tapestry shifted and shimmered. One depicted a cradle rocking, the faint sound of a lullaby drifting through. Another showed a storm-tossed ship, sailors shouting a work song against the waves. Yet another shimmered with the colors of a marketplace, vendors singing their calls in a dozen tongues. Every tapestry was alive, breathing softly with the songs it carried. Eira reached out, her fingers brushing one glowing thread, and instantly a melody filled her ears. It was tender and haunting, a tune that spoke of journeys across seas and the longing to return home. The moment she lifted her hand away, the sound faded back into the mountain's hum. "They long to be remembered," the woman said. "Each song is a journey, and each journey is stitched into those who carry it. But when forgotten, they come here. Perhaps one day someone will carry them again." Eira thought of her quilt then, folded across her shoulders, even in this dream world. Each patch stitched by a hand, each thread carrying a memory. She realized that the quilt was not so different from the woman's tapestries. Both were vessels for journeys, too precious to vanish. She felt a sudden urge to gather these forgotten songs, to fold them carefully into the quilt so that they too could travel once more. The woman seemed to read her thoughts. She held out a glowing spool of thread, still warm with melody. "Take this," she said, "a song once lost, now remembered. The quilt will hold it, and you will carry it where it longs to go." Eira accepted the thread, feeling it hum softly against her palms. It was warm, alive, as though it recognized her. She tucked it into the quilt's fabric, and instantly the patch beneath her hand shimmered brighter. The quilt pulsed with quiet gratitude, as if it too had longed for this union of journeys. For a time, Eira remained in the cavern, listening to the threads sing softly like distant choirs. She thought of all the songs she herself had heard and almost forgotten schoolyard rhymes, the chants of peddlers in the market, even the silly little tune her grandmother sang while stirring porridge. They were fragile things, easily lost, yet here was proof that none of them truly vanished. They waited, patient as mountains, to be remembered eventually. The woman laid down her spindle and looked at Eira with eyes that seemed older than stone. "Your journey is not to stay," she said. "The quilt will call you onward. But remember this, journeys are not only places, they are voices, sounds, songs carried within you. To forget them is to lose part of the path you walk. Carry them, child, and you will never walk alone." Eira nodded, clutching the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She felt the humming of the thread she had taken, now part of her journey, and she knew she would never hear the wind the same way again. It would always seem to carry half a tune, half a memory, waiting to be woven into her own steps as she turned to leave. The mountain exhaled one final song, louder and fuller than before. It was as if it knew she had heard its secret and promised to keep it safe. The wind rose, lifting her hair, and the glowing tapestries swayed like trees in a storm. Eira felt herself lifted too, her body weightless, the mountain's music carrying her higher and higher, until the cavern and the cloaked woman dissolved into threads of starlight when she awoke. She was back beneath the quilt in her grandmother's attic, the moonlight spilling through the window. The air was still, yet faintly she could swear she heard the hum of the mountain in the rafters above. The patch beneath her hand glowed softly, holding the thread of the forgotten song, safe and alive. And Eira, her heart still ringing with the mountain's music, closed her eyes again, knowing that when she next dreamed, the quilt would carry her to yet another journey waiting to be remembered. The quilt's last patch. The attic smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the air still and quiet, except for the soft sigh of the rafters, as if they too were breathing in their long slumber. Eira opened her eyes slowly, her body still wrapped in the warmth of the quilt. For a moment, she did not move. The silence around her felt different this time, not empty, not stale, but full of something that shimmered just beyond hearing. The last journey had been the mountain, a place of songs and forgotten threads. And yet, here she was again, in the familiar glow of moonlight streaming through the attic window. Her hands pressed against the fabric of the quilt, tracing the seams she now knew were more than just stitches. Every patch glimmered faintly, as if lit from within, carrying not only the dreams she had walked through, but the memories of countless others who had slept beneath it before her. Slowly, she sat up, the quilt sliding down her shoulders like a heavy cloak. It no longer looked like the simple patchwork she had first discovered in the chest. Its colors were brighter, deeper, and more alive. She recognized them, Narubi sands glowing with the desert's fire, golden rivers alive with floating lanterns, the emerald shimmer of whispering leaves, the silver of foxfur, and the pale glowing threads of the mountain's songs. Each patch pulsed softly when her fingers brushed against it, like the heartbeat of the journeys she had lived. She realized then, with a strange mix of awe and sorrow, that she had reached the last patch. Her grandmother's voice drifted softly from the shadows of the attic stairway, tender and unhurried. "So, you have returned." Eira turned to see her standing at the top step, her figure wrapped in the familiar shawl, her eyes glowing with a knowing light that made her look both older and ageless at once. She did not seem surprised to find Eira awake, quilt spread across her lap, the air still humming faintly with the echoes of faraway places. Instead, she smiled gently, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. "You touched the last patch, didn't you?" her grandmother asked, stepping closer. Her footsteps were soft against the attic floor, careful as though she too were afraid of disturbing the quiet magic that filled the room. Eira nodded. "It brought me back here. I thought maybe there would be one more place, one more journey, but it ended." Her grandmother shook her head slowly, reaching out to brush a hand over the quilt. The fabric glowed brighter at her touch, as if recognizing an old friend. "No, little one, it never ends. The quilt is a circle. It gathers and it gives, it carries and it returns. Every dreamer adds their story, and when the time is right, it waits for the next pair of hands, the next heart that is willing to listen. What you feel now is not an ending, but the beginning of the quilt's patience." Eira looked down at the glowing fabric, her throat tightening. She wanted to argue, to insist that the journeys could not be over, not yet. Not when her heart still longed for more of the strange and beautiful places stitched into its threads. But she could feel the truth in her grandmother's words. The quilt thrummed softly against her skin, as though it too were whispering that journeys did not end when the traveler returned home. They lingered, woven into memory, waiting to be carried forward. She traced the last patch with her fingertip, noticing how its glow was slightly different from the others. It was faint, tender, like a candle's flame in a draught, and within its light, she saw something she had not noticed before. Teeny threads woven in patterns she recognized, a crescent of moonlight she had once seen reflected on desert sands, the curved outline of a lantern rising into the sky, the fox's tail curling like smoke, the mountain's glowing song threaded across the surface. They were hers, her own journeys, stitched into the fabric alongside the 1,000 others. The realization filled her chest with a warmth so powerful that for a moment she forgot to breathe. "It holds mine now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm part of it." Her grandmother smiled wider, the corners of her eyes crinkling as though she had been waiting for those exact words. "Yes, Eira, you are, and so it will always be. When another dreamer curls beneath it one day, they may walk across sands where your footsteps linger, hear the echo of your laughter, or glimpse the glow of your lantern drifting upward. The quilt remembers. It keeps safe what the world forgets. Eira pulled the quilt closer around her, pressing her cheek against its warmth. She thought of all those before Hertha, nameless travelers whose dreams had filled deserts, cities, forests, and mountains with stories she had walked within. They had given their memories to the quilt, and now she too had joined them. 1,000 journeys, and now hers among them. It made her feel small and vast all at once, like a single star in a sky of countless others, glowing not alone, but as part of a constellation. The attic grew quieter, though the silence no longer felt heavy. It was the silence of rest after a long road of night embracing weary travelers. Her grandmother laid a hand gently on her head, smoothing back her hair the way she had when Eira was a child, frightened of storms. Rest now, my dear. You have carried the quilt far, even if your feet never left this house. That is what journeys are. They live in you now, and that is enough. Eira felt her eyelids grow heavy. She did not resist. The quilt's glow seemed to breathe with her, its light dimming and brightening in rhythm with her heartbeat. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard the desert sands shifting, the lanterns rising, the leaves whispering, the mountains singing. They all swirled together, a chorus of voices that wrapped around her like the quilt itself. She smiled as sleep pulled her downward, not with the expectation of another strange journey, but with the comfort of knowing she was part of something that would outlast her. Just before she surrendered to dreams, she thought she saw her grandmother watching her with an expression that was both proud and wistful, and she thought she heard her whisper one final truth: the quilt never truly ends, child. It only waits for the dreamer brave enough to close their eyes. The attic light faded. The quilt's glow softened until it was no more than a memory of warmth against the skin, and Eira drifted into sleep. She no longer longed for where it might take her, for she understood now that the quilt's greatest gift was not the places it carried her to, but the way it carried her into herself, her courage, her wonder, her voice joining 1,000 others in a fabric that would never unravel. Downstairs, the house settled into quiet slumber, the night sky still silver with moonlight. The chest in the corner of the attic remained open, the quilt folded neatly across Eira's small, sleeping form. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing more than old fabric stitched by tired hands long ago. But those who had ever dreamed beneath it would know better. They would know that within those seams lay deserts and rivers, forests and mountains, lanterns rising and songs forgotten, all waiting for the touch of the next dreamer. And so the quilt waited, patient as time, glowing faintly in the attic shadows, carrying Eira now among its 1,000 journeys. She was home, yet she was also forever stitched into the great fabric of dreamers. The circle had closed, only to open again. Somewhere, someday, another pair of hands would lift the quilt from its chest, and another heart would feel its pull. And when they did, they would find Eira there, smiling quietly within the fabric, welcoming them to the endless story. Your journey through the Quilt of Thousand Journeys comes to a gentle close. Dreamer, carry this calm with you as you rest, knowing that the warmth and magic of the story remain with you. Remember, each night holds a new dream, and whispers of the night will be here to guide you once more. Sleep well, and may your heart remain light.